you're really as much of an expert as anyone can expect you to be. Like, if you're making the project, then you're qualified to do it. It's not really a matter of like, do you deserve to be here anymore? It's more of like, you just got to complete what you started type of thing.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 8 of Deck Creator Corner. Tonight, I am joined by Stephanie Cost of the Colored Tarot Project with her deck, the Chromatic Fates Tarot. It was dreamed up in the fall of 2020 as artists began coming together to discuss personal art projects and their unique journeys through the art world. Each card in Chromatic Fates represents not only a moment of light and perseverance captured during 2020, but also a particular resonance and connection with its illustrator. I don't quite see her on here yet, but we will be getting there. So today we're going to be talking about her aspirations. We're going to talk a little bit about who Stephanie is, and also the really interesting part about this deck for me is about how so many different illustrators came together to create this deck. So I'm really excited to talk with her about that, because I am going to have my deck illustrated by my brother, and so I'm really interested in seeing how she went about working with all of these different artists to create this deck. Hey, Stephanie.
Hey. Hello.
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly fine.
Awesome.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing okay. It's been a busy day so far. I woke up kind of late because I worked night shift the day before, and we went on a little picnic. So I got kind of like out in nature a little bit. So I'm ready to get down to work now, which is fun.
Yeah, well, that sounds great. I've kind of had a busy day today too. I had to wake up early and drive a couple hours back home and get my dog situated. So, and I was like, man, I need a nap before I
Yeah,
go on this live.
it's only halfway through the day here. I don't know what time zone you're in. I think you're maybe Eastern time, but
Yes, yep,
it's
7.
around 4 p.m. here, so I'm like halfway through the day and feeling kind of sleepy. But yeah,
Yeah, we got to push through.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Stephanie. I'm really excited to talk about this deck with you.
Yeah.
Before we jump into that, though, and with thank you everybody for joining, I would just like to do a quick little couple cleansing breaths to get us connected into the space and just ready for the conversation, and then we can just quickly jump into talking about the deck.
Sure. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, everybody, if you're here, you're welcome to take these breaths with us. I invite you to just close your eyes and just take a couple deep breaths with me as I cleanse the space with the maraca. Thank you for joining me for that. Okay, everybody, so I'd like to just start off here and let Stephanie just give us a quick little intro, your name, what your pronouns are, what your work is, and what your aspirations are.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm Stephanie Koss. She, her pronouns. I am an independent artist. I do some freelancing with mostly digital illustration. My aspirations are to eventually shift to less part-time job work and more artwork and be able to kind of
Mm,
live and work remotely so I can kind of go wherever I want. So I have sort of a very freedom-oriented aspiration path, hopefully ahead of me. And the tarot is sort of like a passion project, but it's also a way to achieve that along with a bunch of my friends and the people I know that are on this deck with me. So hopefully a little financial independence for everyone involved is in the future for us. But yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. No, that's really cool. I think that publishing these decks and really following through with like these projects and these goals, just like one step closer, right, to us achieving those things that we want for ourselves. And I think that this is a really perfect example of like what can happen when you put all of these amazing creative minds together and
Yeah.
like write this, and that's my
Yeah.
favorite part about this deck. I don't think that I know of a deck like this where there's just like so much collaboration, like, and so much like it's almost like dependent upon it, right? It's not
Yeah,
like
definitely.
one person has to do a lot of the work and then they just need a little bit of help. It's like, no, it needs this sense of collaboration in order to really come to fruition. So I really love that, and I really am wishing all of you the best
Oh,
in
thank you.
your careers and in your creative futures. But I
Thank
think
you.
that's a perfect little segue point for us to start this conversation. And just give us a little bit of detail, like what's your history with tarot? Like, how did you start with it? Yeah, and so like just give us a little bit of background on why tarot.
Sure, yeah. Honestly, like when I thought about this question, I couldn't think of a specific origin point for when I first stumbled across her. I honestly don't remember. I think I must have been a kid or
Hmm.
maybe an early teenager. I started drawing when I was around 13, seriously, like intentionally. And I think it must have been kind of part and parcel with that because to me it's always represented a very
Mm.
creative method of going about things and sort of like a idea generation tool as well as sort of like a narrative inspiration point.
Mm.
More so than like I'm not a tarot reader, so I am only an expert in as much as I've researched it from other sources.
Okay.
Um, I mean, maybe all tarot people think of it this way, but I hate calling myself an expert, so I have that little bit of like insecurity
Mm.
about it. But the most I can do is sort of like look at the cards and how they all work together and kind of like generate ideas from that and how they especially interact with each other. So it's just
Yep.
kind of always part of like my adult life, I guess, in the background. And I go through periods where I'll like have fun organizing different like dream decks that might not ever happen, but it's something about the system of it has always really appealed to me, I think. So it's always been
Mm.
something where I can go like, "Oh, I really love drawing mermaids and wouldn't it be cool to organize a system of like how would the major arcana work with like different types of like fantasy creatures that I'm illustrating or different books
Mm.
I'm reading like that." So it's just kind of a way that I've always processed ideas, I guess.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And it reminds me of the conversation that I had with Brendan from the Pacific Northwest Tarot. Because for him, his project just started as like, oh, it's like an art project, not so much like I'm making a tarot
Yeah,
deck. I just have like 78 prompts to make an art
right. Yeah,
from that,
yeah.
And so I think that's really awesome because it adds this layer to the deck and to the art and just to like the creation of it, to where you're coming at it not from necessarily a point of like magic and divination, but more like how can I express this in various different
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah, exactly. It definitely adds a lot of depth, especially when I'm thinking of stories and characters in stories. I
Mm.
associated it with sort of like a narrative, almost a narrative wheel, where everyone has its like perfect place in the story. And thinking of it that way really adds a lot of depth to each character or each person in this system because you realize that they're kind of like dependent upon each other
Right.
and symbolically they have their place in the grand scheme of things. And I think that's sort of how I think of tarot most.
Yeah, and for me, when I was learning about tarot, that this resonates a lot with me because when I was learning about tarot, like that was one of the first kind of like, I guess, methods that I learned. Like I was watching some random video on YouTube and he was like, forget about the meanings, like Just don't even worry about the meanings. Just grab a really rich, like a picture rich deck with a lot of symbols and illustrations, and just lay out 3 or 4 cards and make a story. Just make a story with the
Yeah,
images in the card. Don't worry about like,
yeah,
oh, the Three of Pentacles is about collaboration. Just make a story with the cards. And so that was like, whoa, this is like mind blowing for me because I had spent so much time trying to memorize them. And then when I just started to try to make a story from them, I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. Like, this is what I
yeah.
needed. And I really love that about this deck too, is because since I believe, right, each card is made by a separate artist.
Yeah.
So each card is made by a separate artist. So like there is this feel of like there's differences, right, between like the styles of each
Oh,
card.
definitely. Yeah.
But like even despite those differences, like you said, they each have their place within the whole story. It doesn't
Yeah.
feel like a lot of different things trying to come together. It just feels like, people with their own unique selves working together to make this deck. So I think that
Yeah.
was like when I saw that you were working with so many artists, I was like, oh my gosh, like how does she do that? Because I really wanted to have a conversation with you because I am going to be having my brother illustrate the deck for me. Um, and so a lot of decks out there, most people like just illustrate it themselves. And so like not a lot of people go that extra mile to like work with other artists, much less 78 other artists. And so I'm
Yeah.
really excited to kind of see how that kind of came to fruition. And that kind of leads to my question of like, so you're into tarot and you like it for like this artistic value and also for maybe like storytelling value and like seeing
Yeah.
how the archetypes get reflected in them. So how did it go from that to okay, now I'm gonna make this Chromatic Fates tarot, like this is what I want? Like was there something
Um,
lacking in the market that you didn't resonate, or was it just an idea?
it was less about the market and more about into like the people that I knew personally. I remember very distinctly having a conversation with a friend, John Niemeister, who did the, I think, Eight of Cups in the deck. And this was back in like late September, early October 2020. And we were talking about just like art things. Like we were actually having a very in-depth conversation with a bunch of friends, and it was about wanting to break free of a style that the market has come to expect of, and like having this urge to do more personal
Mm,
art or like socially conscious art, like art with more of a purpose that felt more true to sort of like a deeper calling than just kind of
mm-hmm.
commercial art, both to
Mm-hmm.
a certain extent artists. And he was talking about how he was worried because his audience had gotten so big, they came to expect a certain thing from him, and he wasn't sure that they would resonate with personal work that he wanted to do. And well, I was been working on my own deck for a long time, but sort of like in the background. And I just had this brainwave. I was like, oh, know what we should do? We should do a tarot deck because, like, what better way to kind of bring out something personal within you and also kind of like bring different artists together and kind of like throw caution to the winds when it comes to what your audience expects of you, because it wouldn't be your project that they would have expectations for. It would be just kind of like a group project. And he's like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
we should totally do it. And I stayed up all night basically like staring at the ceiling like, oh man, we could actually do this. Like, and at the time it seemed so, the entire night thinking about it, and this lasted for about 2 or 3 days where I just writing down ideas. And that's kind of how you know that something's gonna happen, because you're obsessed with it. It seemed really simple at the
Yeah.
time. I was like, oh well, if each artist only takes a single card, surely it's going to be doable. Like, it's going to be a certain amount of work per
Right.
person. It's actually feasible. So that's just sort of how it began. I began to put out feelers with my friends, like, hey, are you interested if I do something like? And they responded like overwhelmingly positive. I mean, it's kind of an insane project in a lot of ways, because I very quickly found out that it was much more complicated than it seemed, but that's the project. But that's definitely how it began. And all of us were obviously deeply distressed about, you're kind of in this mode where, especially to create things, and especially personal things, when so much is happening. Like you have a kind of a sensory overload. So I think it kind of really helped people to have like a group initially come together and kind of chat about our
Mm.
cards and Howard too. Even so, it was a great thing to kind of during the end of 2020 and have like a project that we could all contribute to at the same time. Especially in the early stages when I kind of had my pick of artists, I tried to work with people one on one as much as possible and get a sense for what card they enjoyed doing most. Because my thought was that if they could pick a card that they kind of resonated with the most, the deck would really show that. Like it would have this huge resonance going on where you could really tell by looking at every single card that the artists completely bought into it. Like they really believe in whatever card that they happen to be illustrating. I think it turned out well. It just became more and more complicated the longer it went on.
I heard what you were saying, and I think that that's partly one of the next things that I wanted to ask you about was that process of like working one on one and the process of like, did you give them that liberty to kind of just express what they wanted, or did you have an idea for each card of like how you wanted it to be and then they kind of illustrated it?
Um, well, what's important is that for the majority of the artists, I was really familiar with their styles already, and to a certain
Mm.
extent, some of their personalities too. I started with people I knew, and then branched out to like kind of friends of friends, and then I did sort of like an open call last. So luckily, the bulk of the artists I was already pretty familiar with, and I was able to sort of
Mm.
talk with them. A lot of them were not familiar with tarot at all, but they were really interested. So I did a lot of conversations one on one where I was like kind of just reassuring them, being like, hey, you don't have to be an expert. I can walk you through like maybe the top 5 that I think you'd be suited for. Um,
Mm.
I asked a lot of questions like, can you give me some things that maybe you're going through right now in your life, maybe some things that you want to be drawing, like what are you
Mm.
inclined to do right now? And from there we kind of got a good process going where I could kind of recommend cards to them and they could kind of find one that they really kind of clicked with and go from there. And I think it helped a lot as opposed to just kind of arbitrarily assigning them something, which,
Yeah,
wasn't ideal.
yeah, no, and that's really awesome how you kind of tried to link their lives into
Yeah.
like the card that they were illustrating because it adds that depth for them, especially for people like you said, a lot of them aren't like necessarily like tarot readers or anything like that.
Yeah.
Um, and it's interesting because that's kind of a little bit of the difficulty that I'm having with my brother too, because he's not a tarot reader either. And so like he's wanting to illustrate these cards, but then he also has a hard time like knowing what each card even means to begin with.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think it helps, especially if you're talking to people that aren't super familiar with tarot. It helps to reassure them that there's no hard and fast rules at all. Like you could go by
Mm,
we ended up doing a Rider Waite Smith deck, um,
right,
but making it pretty not modern because that sort of brings to mind like a certain color aesthetic. But
right.
it was kind of like a classic take on the deck. But you don't have to do that. You could let people just kind of basically do whatever they want. I think people get really discouraged when they take a look at the original cards and they see like the crayfish and the hermetic
Yeah.
symbols and they're just like, what the hell is going
Yeah.
on? So it's like you can do as much or as little or as much of the original symbols as you want to. And I think that kind of brings people closer to a comfort level with like what they're already inclined to draw and that sort of thing.
Yeah, see, that's also another point that I was going to ask you too was how close or how far did you stay from the Rider-Waite system for this deck?
Um, it really depended on the artist. I let people do it as close to the original system as they wanted, but I framed it sort of almost like an Easter egg system. Like, oh, it would be
Mm.
really fun if you included this, but you don't have to. And some of
Oh,
them
that's
were,
cool.
yeah, some of them were really into it. Like Aria Fawn, who did our moon card, she actually included like the crayfish and the wolf from the original
Mm.
system, though that symbology has been almost completely lost to time for the
Right.
modern reader. So it became more of like a source of fun and interest more than like a rule system for us, and I think it worked well.
Yeah, and I think that that's how it is for those of us who are, I don't really include myself in like a Rider-Waite-Smith expert because I don't really use it too much and I don't know a lot of the Golden Dawn and Hermetic symbols and
Oh
stuff. But
yeah.
for those people who do have that knowledge, it'll be really fun to go through this deck and see those, like you said, those little Easter eggs, right?
Yeah.
You know, like,
Yeah.
so
I
that's really cool.
I personally really love when there's deviations from the original symbols, but they're still sort of there. Like our Three of Swords, for example, is still a heart being pierced by swords, but it's in this really fun, vibrant, like green blue color scheme. It's all
Mm.
about like life and plants and stuff. And the artist was really hesitant at first, and it was really sweet. She was just like, I don't know if I can pull this off. And I'm like, no, trust me, like my vision is this could be so cool. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
so
And that's awesome what you just said right there, Stephanie, because it's like the collaboration was to such an extent that you were able to almost like you knew that that person was going to be able to like bring
yeah.
this card to life, like even though they were like, I don't know, you're like, no, you
Yeah.
got this, I know.
Yeah, that was kind of the joy of it in a lot of ways, was seeing artists that were really like honored to be there, but sort of apprehensive because they didn't understand that they fit. Like I had so
Mm.
many people come to me and they were like, I don't know if I can do this. Like everyone is so much better than me. I don't know if this is gonna be a good fit. And I'm like, no, trust me. Like I'm with you for a reason. Like
Right.
I believe that you're the best fit for this card. You're just kind of have to trust me, and it all worked out pretty well.
Yeah, so the card picking process was very much along the lines of like, let's see what this artist is going through, but were there also some cards where you were just like, this person has to illustrate this card? Like,
Yeah, it especially towards the end of the like color assigning process or the card assigning process, it became really tricky because sooner or later you have to fill specific cards and you can't give
mm,
people as much of an option anymore. You just have to go to them and be like, can you do this card?
right.
And if they say yes, you just kind of have to apologize and be like, I'm sorry I didn't give you an option, but I really
Yeah.
appreciate you doing this for me. Um, but yeah, it was a huge mix. Like especially in the early stages, it was much easier to have like huge conversations with people and to give them like a free range of options. And then as it got like closer and closer to completionism, they had less options. So it was sort of unfortunate in that way, but I still think that we paired off people with cards really well, even in the latter stages.
Yeah, and I think that those artists towards the end, right, that were accepting of the maybe a little bit more limited
Yeah,
like options, I think for them it was still like even though the options were limited, I can still imagine that they were like, yes, I really want to do this, you know,
yeah,
like it was like maybe like they didn't have as much of that liberty to add some stuff into it, but at the same time it's kind of like what you said. um it's like different parts of the project have different ways of like coming to fruition, and I think
yeah,
that a lot of people think that it's just like the same way all the way through from beginning to finish, and there's a lot of like nuances and differences between like how you start a project off and how it finishes.
yeah, definitely.
And so on that note, I wanted to ask, has was color always like the main thing about this deck? Like, what role did that really play bringing this deck together?
Um, at first, honestly, it was just sort of it was a motif idea, so it was purely aesthetic. And
Mm,
I've always resonated really strongly with using color. Like that's kind of what people associate with my art style. So right off the bat, I was
mm,
like, oh, if I have a strength, this is going to be it, and I can sort of gravitate towards that. And then it just became sort of like an early, kind of like a daydream idea. Like if you picture yourself spreading out a deck, and I was like, oh, it would be really cool to see if it had like one giant color gradient. So we can do like a rainbow theme where.
mm.
So it started off sort of almost shallow, where it was just kind of a visual idea, but then it kind of picked up more more sense. I don't want to say it gained meaning because I think it's just me realizing how much sense it did actually make as it
Yeah.
went on. Like, I started to realize that I couldn't do the entire deck as one gradient because that would make the major arcana way too limited in color scheme because they'd be so many in one
Mm.
range. So kind of early on, I made the decision of, well, we'll let the major arcana cards be whatever they want. Like they can be as colorful or as like weirdly acid trippy color scheme as they feel like being.
Yeah.
Um, and then I realized because of that, the minor arcana start with one range and then end with that range again. So it actually becomes more cyclical than I was
Mm.
expecting, which is really cool because it plays into sort of like the narrative wheel of the whole
Right.
tarot story. So that was sort of almost like a happy accident where the scheme made more and more sense as I went along, and that's when it became a strong theme to base the actual like deck idea off of. Is when I realized that it could play
Mm.
into sort of the narrative aspects of kind of like a wheel, um, and that of course that fed like more of the creativity aspect. And I would like to say that I started with a really strong idea for like the deck's niche, but I didn't. It it was very organic. I definitely, the more I thought about the deck as we went on, the more strong its theme became, and it eventually became something geared more towards creative or like creative people and artists and writers. And that was just purely by dint of the fact that that's what we knew. We weren't really comfortable talking outside of our own wheelhouse. So it was sort of like a project for artists by
Mm.
artists. But so much of us, or so many of us, were used to talking about like the creative process to begin with that I just realized it was a natural extension of what the deck already was becoming, is sort of a tool to talk to people to kind of like unleash creativity and kind of like the fun aspects of even the darker cards and stuff like that. So they kind of all play together.
Yeah, that's no, and it makes total sense. And is that kind of like also the little bit of the origin story of how the name came about? Like after you decided the color scheme was going to be the main aspect, is
The
that
name,
how the name, or is that a different story?
the name. I was originally just going to call it the Color Tarot Project deck or something really
Okay.
uncreative like that. My friend Elaine, Elaine Ryan, who takes she did the Ten of Swords card, and she was one of the first artists on the project with me. She arbitrarily assigned it a name as an example in
Mm.
sort of like a marketing push towards the other artists. She just gave it like a sample name, and it was Chromatic Fates, and I was just like, this is perfect, let's just use this. But it makes sense because I think I lacked the confidence to kind of come up with a tarot deck name. It just felt too real at the time. So
Mm.
it kind of required that extra push by my friend to be like, we're making a tarot deck. It's going to be a big deal. Here's a name for your tarot deck.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Well,
I
see,
can't I
that's
can't take
awesome.
credit for that one.
Yeah, but that's awesome because it just adds to the collaborative nature
Yeah,
of
yeah,
the
for
deck, you
sure.
know. It like it just goes to show that like maybe like yeah, like you had the idea to like find the artist and you were working together with them, but like it truly at its deepest essence, it truly is a deck of collaboration between
Yeah,
artists, you know, like
absolutely. Yeah, I
uh,
would be dead in the water without the other artists. I mean, like
yeah.
I could work for 10 years and create 78 cards of my own, but it wouldn't be the same project even then. Just wouldn't have that kind of added life to it that comes from a bunch of people working
Right,
together.
exactly. So did you illustrate any card?
I did there. It's actually not done yet because I've been so swamped with everything else. But I'm taking the Empress card, and it's about 80%
Ooh.
done. Yeah, and
Stephanie, I'm so excited.
I was a little bit selfish because I knew that I could have my pick of cards, but I wanted to wait in case other people wanted cards. Like I didn't want to deprive anyone of their choice.
Okay.
Um, but at some point, no one was taking the Empress yet, and I'm just like, I need this one. I want to draw a bunch of pomegranates. I want to draw like
Yeah.
flowy fabric and stuff. So it's gonna be pretty decadent, I hope.
Yes, that's so amazing. That's so awesome. And so, I wanted to ask you some questions here about just like the deck creation process, like just that whole thing in general.
Yeah, sure.
So I have a few questions. I wanted to see what what were your initial expectations for this project, and like how did the project actually meet those expectations when you put it out into the world and did your Kickstarter and all that stuff.
Hang on, I have to read my little.
No worries.
Um, Honestly, the initial expectations were very modest. I I could visualize a deck because I have a whole bunch of friends that have made tarot decks. So I've ordered a bunch for my friends, and I really wanted that like little gorgeous experience. I could picture it in my mind, but I really had no idea realistically of how it would fund. So my expectations
Mm.
monetarily were very unformed right up until like the last possible second before the Kickstarter launched. I had no idea. I was kind of a nervous wreck. Um, but in terms of what it became, it definitely kind of ballooned beyond my original aspirations because I thought it would just kind of originally be kind of like a fun little project to do with a bunch of friends, kind of a way to do some networking if people hadn't met each other yet, or to kind of like a group experience with people that did know each other. Um, I thought it would be very low key. I wasn't prepared for things like lawyer contracts or like usage right contracts and
Oh.
manufacturer emails and like all this other back end stuff, like the administration stuff, was a huge
Mm.
kind of shock for me. And it is a really great learning process. And I feel like I've learned a ton, but it's still like a far cry from the original, like little indie project that I assumed we would be doing.
Yeah.
But I mean, like in retrospect, with almost 80 people, it makes a ton of sense that you'd have to lay groundwork for like a huge undertaking, especially like our original Kickstarter goal was like 14,000, and I thought that was a little outrageous even at the time. I mean, like I padded in a lot of conservative things, like oh, like what if there's delays or they tack on tariffs and it cost me a few thousand extra dollars just to get the thing delivered, and I'd heard all these horror stories from friends who've had projects in the last year with COVID that I
Mm.
definitely wanted it to be safe. So I made it kind of what felt like high at 14,000 to cover all these bases, and it blew up
It's
completely.
669% funded.
Yeah. So it's just been like an exercise of managing changing expectations and trying to keep ahead of things before they get beyond my control. And I think it's done okay. Like deck wise, it was always I always knew it was going to do okay because it was a gorgeous deck. Like the art came in
Mm.
first and the art was lovely. So I figured like even if we don't fund enormously, we're still going to be able to deliver like a beautiful little art collection to the people
Yeah.
that do buy the deck. So that was kind of the first reassurance. And then everything else was just problems that come along with success, which is a good problem to have, I guess.
Yeah, it is, but at the same time, I don't remember who I was talking with, but we were talking about Kickstarter specifically being like, I don't want to use the word notorious, but it is notorious for like all of a sudden like you have 5,000 backers and you're just like, whoa, like and
Yeah.
so I was talking about that with somebody because like for small indie people, like for me, for example, I'm in Puerto Rico. If I get 5,000 decks, that my logistics is going to be like astronomically more
Yeah.
complicated and stuff. And so even though the success is great, like yes, you want that, like it's also like finding that space in between where you're not like overwhelmed and killing
Yeah.
yourself and like because I know for most people who did the Kickstarter, a lot of them like it's not an easy like it's not like a walk in the park, like
No.
it's like
Yeah.
you said, like there's a lot of like back behind the scenes stuff that and like also just like having to complete the deck and like finish designing things and like there's still things that
Yeah.
have to happen. Just because the funding is there doesn't mean that it's like, oh, like it's
Yeah,
all
right,
good.
exactly.
um But so I wanted to, so you talked a little bit about the unexpected administrative stuff. And so my next question was, what do you know now that you wish you would have known before starting? And I wonder if it was that, if it's that same thing, or maybe
It's
there's something.
very similar. Yeah, there's a huge overlap for sure between things that I would do differently and administration things. But honestly, a lot of it is design related. Like the border design that we ended up with, the like the colored gradients that go in the back of every single
Hmm.
card, that was a very late edition. I was working on that like by hand in like March or April. And originally our border design was going to be completely different. We designed a few different options actually with like black borders and little symbols for the suits that go in the corners, and then we were going to do like
Hmm.
little bands of like gilding color over top of the art. And I realized very quickly that I'd made a huge mistake by letting people do 78 different art styles and not taking into account the border, which I should have done first. And it turned into a
Oh.
major problem because like every card was beautiful, but they didn't all go well with the same border. So it was
Oh.
kind of a minor miracle
Yeah.
that we ended up with the border that we did. Finally, I was just like, I'm gonna do gradient colors. And then I tried it with a few cards and it looked good. And then I tried it with more cards, it still looked good. And at that point, I started to relax and I was like, okay, this is gonna be time consuming, but at least it's gonna look good for every single card we have.
Yes.
So I would definitely, like, if I did this again, I would come up with a border first, include it with the template, and then send that to the artist right from the get go and be like, design your art around this
Mm.
aesthetic, and instead of doing it the other way around. Um,
Yeah, that's a really important piece of advice, especially, I mean, maybe even more so in this context where you're working with so many different artists and stuff.
mm-hmm.
But just in general, a lot of these like questions when I ask the creators, like, what do you wish you would have known? Like, I want to say 9 out of 10 people have said design, something about design, like
Yeah.
whether it's borders or colors or this or
Yeah.
something, but there's always about the design work. And it's interesting because like as artists, we think like that's the one thing that we're paying attention to is like the design and stuff, but
Yeah.
really there's just so many things that go into it, into making a deck, that like all these little small details just kind of, you don't think of them until later. You're
Yeah.
there like trying to mess with 50 borders and you're just like, oh gosh, what did I do?
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, that was a
um,
big one. It ended up being pretty fun to work on. It was just a little time consuming. Like initially, our Kickstarter was set to launch on the 10th of May,
mm.
and I had to push it back to later in the month on the 28th because I was still doing borders and like
Yeah.
hours. And then we
Yeah.
had to do I ended up making like a dummy deck. I sent off the art that we had to, I think it was makeplayingcards.com, and they
Mm.
do really decent little decks. And the
Oops.
benefit is that you can order just one or two instead of having to meet like a minimum quotient like you would for an
Oh,
overseas
like
manufacturer.
literally one or two cards?
Yeah, with Make Playing Cards, you can submit, or sorry, one or two decks. So you can just
Oh, okay,
order
okay,
like a
okay.
single deck and they'll send it to you, which is really nice if you're doing like promo images, which we ended up
Mm-hmm.
using a lot of. So that was really nice. Um, but yeah, like things that I would do differently, it's all about timing. Like I would do the contract and the like usage rights, legal paperwork first, and I would
Mm.
do like the explainer because a lot of artists, we had artists from the whole spectrum of experience. Like we had commercial artists, we had game artists, we had traditional painters.
Mm.
Some of them had never seen a contract like that before, and I needed them to sign something because one thing I learned is like, oh, you don't want to enter a commercial product with a piece of art that you don't have the legal rights to. So that was a huge learning curve
Oh.
too. It was just a lot of stuff that I'd never considered before because I was thinking of it as like, oh, it's a little group of friends. We're gonna make
Just
a
we're
little
all
deck.
working together, yeah, but
Yeah.
yeah.
So it's a lot of stuff that I would, in retrospect, have chosen to have up front and presented to people right away. But at the same time, like I think I did the best I could, and it was definitely a learning curve. And the people I worked with ended up being like really reasonable and understanding. So it could have gotten a lot worse with my level of inexperience.
Yeah. Well, that's really awesome. And if you don't mind, like later on, maybe we can message you a little bit more about that
Sure.
because that's something, I'm that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be going into a
Yeah,
commercial product with somebody else's art. And so, like, I don't know. I didn't even know I had to do any of those things that you said, you
I
know?
didn't
So,
either. Yeah. You're lucky in that it's only a single person. I'll say.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. Because that's what I meant earlier when I was like, it's probably a lot more difficult when you have 79 other artists that you, or
It's
78 other people.
yeah, it's a lot like chasing cats in a lot of ways. Like trying to herd them, like I need my contract, please.
Yes, yes, that
Yeah.
makes sense. Okay, so I have a couple more questions about the deck creation process and all that stuff. How was marketing? How was that? How was the process of that? Like, was
Oh
that?
man. Um, in some ways, it was a lot of fun, unexpectedly, because there is a certain creative aspect to marketing that's almost like a game, and it can be very
Mm,
satisfying. Like when you realize that you've created really good little assets for marketing, and you sort of get more into the comfort level that's associated with like, oh, like I can write little blurbs now and actually enjoy putting this out and showing the world what we have. Um, for the most part, I hate marketing. I
yeah.
absolutely hate it. It's almost painful for me to solicit people for something. It's just part of my personality. I just am deeply uncomfortable doing it. So what helped me in the end was enlisting a little help. And that's where having so many artists really came through for us, because I feel like the heavy lifting
Mm.
was ultimately done by the artists at the end of the day. Like I remember I hadn't slept the night before the launch. I just worked nonstop. I was like pulling out my hair. I was miserable.
Ah, Stephanie.
And yeah, and that's the most crucial part of marketing. Like you want to have like a fun countdown. You want like a lead up to
Right.
the launch. And I was in absolutely no headspace to do it, and I felt really miserable about it. But I had made time to write a huge email to all the artists, and I made them like a little media packet with like different images that they could use on social media and different blurbs and different hashtags. And it ended up like basically saving the project because we funded so quickly and were able to get the like Kickstarter project we love badge or something,
Mm-hmm.
which I knew was really important. So that was why it's so stressful, because it's like, oh, I need this to do really well in a certain amount of time, but I'm brain dead.
Right.
So the artist like really pulled through and marketed it everywhere, and it did amazingly well. And I can't take credit for that at all. Yeah.
Thanks,
So
artist.
yeah, marketing is another one of those things where it can't be an afterthought, which is something I learned too. Like it's another thing where as far in advance as I thought I was starting with the marketing, I would have started months and months earlier,
Oh,
creating
wow.
assets. Mostly it's about timetables. Like I would be much more diligent about making myself a calendar really early on, putting out more newsletters.
Mm.
But of course, all of us are mostly stressed about the art, so it's really hard
Right.
to it's hard to do like the customer facing stuff for in the best of times. But yeah, marketing is really tough. I don't like it at all. I
Yeah.
may never like it. I don't know. The most I can hope for is better marketing. So
Right. And
maybe one day.
it was an important topic when I was talking with Kim from Way of the Panda Tarot. She's like all about marketing. She
Oh,
loves
nice.
marketing. And I love listening to her because for the most part, I really dislike ads and like marketing and stuff like that. I really, but it's the contemporary ads that we get exposed to nowadays. Like, I don't mind marketing when it's like something that is actually of value and something that they're
Yeah.
actually trying, like you marketing your artistic tarot deck, like that for me has meaning and value. You know, if it's just like marketing, like I don't know, just some random thing or like
Yeah.
some random sponsored ad that I see on my Instagram, it's like, ugh. But if I see an ad for like a tarot deck, I'm like, ooh, what's
Yeah.
that? You know?
Yeah, I'm
And
the same
so
way.
I,
Yeah.
I love that she kind of has this perspective of like when we're doing marketing, we're just wanting to share what we have with other people. It's not so much about like getting them to like of course it's getting them to buy your product. Like
Yeah.
that's the end goal, but really it's just about exposing other people to what you have to offer.
Yeah, I found that to be true, especially because I knew going in that there would be a market on Kickstarter and in like the wider world that I'd never been exposed to of tarot readers. Like I'm passionate about tarot, but I'm not in the tarot community. I don't
Right.
like regularly talk to people about tarot. Um, so I knew that the market was out there, and I knew that they wouldn't appreciate just like advertisements thrown at them. So it became sort of all about just you got to make pretty pictures, you got to show what you have, and then you just have to trust that if people are interested in looking at it more, then you'll get more eyeballs on your product as opposed to trying to make a commercial to make people click on a buy now button. And there are definitely
Exactly.
ways to do it better. Like I'm a marketing novice, but I didn't beat myself too much over the head with it. I just kind of let it happen. And I'm sure I could have done more. Like I could have advertised more on Facebook and Instagram and but it's just so deeply exhausting.
I couldn't agree more. And like, I struggle, like, even just with my Instagram, like posting on Instagram, a
Yeah.
lot of the times, as like a professional tarot reader, our posts are kind of like ads. You know,
Right.
like
Yeah.
we're like showing people, like, here, I'll give you this free reading, and then you can get interested to like get a reading with me.
Yeah.
And so like that's why I feel like I get so exhausted from my tarot page and posting, because like I feel like I'm doing double, like I'm doing marketing and also like offering like messages and help for other
Right.
people. And so I totally understand with you with about like how exhausting it feels, because
Yeah.
like it really it does affect, I feel at least it affects our brain and energy levels differently when we're
Yeah.
engaging in that kind of language and stuff.
I think it's really hard because for any sort of creative person I've ever known, up to a certain point you have this nice disconnect between like your practice and your source of income, right?
Mm,
So especially with artists, I mean, this is just my wheelhouse. There comes a point when you're required to become on some level like an entrepreneur. So you have to start blending those two areas together, and it becomes more and more difficult to tell the difference,
right.
which means that it's more and more draining to work on these products that you are now thinking about being monetized, you know.
Yep.
So it is really hard on a deeper level. I think that and I took a marketing class during this experience and I didn't finish it
Mm,
yet, so it's ongoing, but it's helped me a lot. And it's geared towards painters and creatives. And one of the things that I really gleaned from it that helped me a lot is that you really have to go in with a mindset of you're sort of generously sharing something of value. And if you
mm,
don't have confidence in what you're offering, you're not going to do well because people will be able to tell.
right.
You're not going to enjoy it. Like you're going to be miserable. And I definitely noticed the difference. Like when the Kickstarter actually funded in the first day, it was
The
suddenly,
first day.
yeah, it was suddenly much easier to market because I knew I had confidence that it was of value to people. Whereas before, it was like it was almost asking
Mm.
for a favor. It was like, please look at my project. It's
Oh,
new,
that
it's
makes
a little small, it's a little
sense.
thing. It might not be up your alley. And
Yeah,
then
yeah, yeah.
and then once it funded, I was like, oh, okay, well, people want this. Suddenly I feel more emboldened to put it out into the world and be like, hey,
Mm.
you might not have seen this before, you might like it, take a look at it. So it's definitely a mindset thing that can make marketing a lot easier to handle, I think.
Yeah, that's really interesting, that psychology change, right? From being like unsure because you're just unsure, you haven't released it yet, but then once you
Yeah.
see it being received by others, it's like, oh, okay, let's do this,
Yeah, yeah,
like
exactly.
that's really awesome. And I hadn't thought of that kind of, it's almost like I don't know, it's kind of like a boost, right? It's like it gives you that extra little bit of confidence that you need to not feel like you're just like offering something to somebody.
Yeah, like pulling open a trench coat and be like, "Hey, you want my tarot deck?"
Yeah, exactly. Now it's more like, look, we're funded, like this is a
Yeah.
good project, like, So yeah, that's a really good little piece of like information that I hadn't thought of about like how you can like how your views on your own project change over time as you're
Yeah.
moving
And
through
they're
the
so important. Like I can't even I still feel like I could have done a lot better if I'd only had more confidence in the project from the get-go.
mm,
Like I'm very insular as a person, so my enjoyment from the product is all about the experience of working with other artists. It's not
mm-hmm,
necessarily even about the money. Like
right.
we had most of the artists in like a group chat, like a little Discord channel. And it was really fun. Like the first day, even the first week, they were like really excited. They were like posting, they were cheering. And to me, it was kind of a weird disconnect because I was happy for them, but it was very binary to me. It was like, okay, this number either represents we're funded or we're not funded. It's not so
Mm,
much about like, oh, we're doing X amount better than we were yesterday. It's
right.
still just like, oh, we're funded. It's a yes or no equation to me. So it's different from like a project organizer standpoint, but I did love being surrounded by like my peers and my friends and stuff. So that's kind of where I got my energy back from when I kind of drained it with all the marketing stuff
Yeah. Well,
on
and
that side.
it's also good to be like there's a fine line between like optimism and realistic, right? Like
Yeah.
there's like it's so fine and like and I don't think there's anything wrong with being optimistic, but I also understand coming from a place of like we've never done this project before. I'm unsure of
Yeah.
how to move on with this project, but I feel that like everything has its place and like it maybe if it hadn't been that way, I don't know, the collaborative nature of the deck wouldn't have been so full and so present um from the get-go because as you said from the beginning, you were kind of like surrounded by all of this excitement and all of this like
Yeah.
let's do this, like we're gonna do this, like let's get together and have and
Yeah.
even though like maybe on a personal level you were still kind of like like I don't know, but being surrounded by all those people who are so enthusiastic and so ready to kind of move with this project, like I can see how that was like a big like motivating factor in like moving
Yeah.
forward with the project and stuff.
Yeah, it's one of those projects where you start out and you have this big idea and it seems mostly like a pipe dream until it gets going. And I've been in this position before where I'll have like a really big idea and I'll be excited about it and then it just kind of fizzles out because it's just bigger than I was expecting it to be and I
mm.
wasn't truly serious about it. But with when you're dealing with so many other artists, you don't have that option anymore. So it's like, oh,
Yeah.
normally I may have just been like, oh, well, that was a fun idea, but I'm not going to actually do that. Whereas now it's like, oh no, we're doing this. We don't have an option.
Mm.
It's happening.
Yeah, yeah. I've already reached out to 50 artists, and they've
Yeah,
already sent me out. But it's like I
yeah,
gotta do it now, which is great because I also feel like a lot of people, um, like this need for community, right? The need for having people to support you through this process. Like I feel
yeah,
like a lot of people feel like they need to like tackle this project on their own. And for example, Maritza from the Gentle Tarot, she said that one of her biggest motivators and one of the main reasons why she was able to finish the project was from the support from her backers on Kickstarter. Like
yeah,
and hearing their opinions and getting their feedback on different questions about the box and the deck. And so even though she was just the one artist and she did the whole thing herself, she really felt like without having those backers, she wouldn't have been able to kind of really complete this project. And so it's that collaborative nature, right? It's about understanding that even though you might be responsible for a big portion of it, this sense of community always comes in, and that's what I'm kind of hoping for too with my projects and the tarot community and stuff is like finding that support in them. And actually the deck that I'm making, one of them I'm making with 4 or 5 other coven members from because I'm part of a witch coven, and we're creating this tarot deck for our coven.
Oh,
And
nice.
so I'm working with each of them to like get their opinions and like all that stuff. So So in a way, that's also a collaborative deck, and I'm kind of getting
Yeah.
input and stuff.
Yeah,
Um,
I really think that sort of thing makes all the difference. Like, it's one thing to make a deck because you saw that tarot is popular on Kickstarter these days and you want to do a project. Like, that's fine. You know, it's a commercial art venture, but it's another thing to be invested for the sake of people that you know personally who are like truly enthusiastic about your ideas and about the symbolisms and stuff, because then it just transforms into something that you actually love, like that you get energy from even as you're
mm,
working. And I think it makes a huge difference. And I told someone else this. I was interviewing with my friend Alan, who is another artist on the deck, and he was asking me something about this too. And I think he asked if I was worried or something about like, are you worried about coming off as authentic if you're not part of the tarot community like more deeply?
mm,
And I was like, sort of like I am worried about people perceiving whether you're like a true tarot reader or if you're like an expert with every
mm.
single card. But at the end of the day, I think people know that no one is going to make a tarot deck if they don't love it, because it takes
Yeah.
so much time
Yes.
that you're just not going to survive. It's really like the ultimate gauntlet of like, it'll pare down every intention you have into the purest form of it, because otherwise like the deck just isn't going to be made. So
Yeah.
I think if anyone survives the process and puts out a tarot deck, it's a huge achievement. Like, it means that you really love the thing because you put everything you have into creating this behemoth of an art project.
Yes, and I always thought that, like, I've been in tarot for 10 years, and I've been seeing a lot of indie decks and stuff, and especially over the last few years I've been seeing a lot of indie decks. And like I always felt like I knew that it was a lot of work because I've been following indie creators and I see with their
Yeah.
process and stuff. I always felt like I knew, but now that I'm actually like starting the process, I'm just like, wow. And especially after interviewing so many people now, like this is my eighth interview now. And like, every time I interview somebody, I learn something new. And I was like, how is this possible? Like, there's still stuff to learn. Like, and I've already been
Yeah.
talking about this for weeks. But yeah, it's been eye opening for me to see like actually how deep and how intense and like the journey of making a tarot deck isn't just like, oh, let's just make 78 cards.
Yeah.
um, so that's really awesome. And I think that, yeah, I think that this conversation, it goes ties in really well with the next question, that I wanted to ask you. And we're kind of getting towards the end here, Stephanie. So I wanted to see, um, like how going through with the project has really changed your life, and also what do you want people to get like from using this deck?
Ooh. Well, I feel like my answer is going to be different than if you ask me in 6 months from now. So far, my life is more complicated, but I think in a really good way in the long run. It's definitely taught me to advocate for myself more and to
Mm,
have confidence, especially when making decisions. I find myself doing little things like I apologize less in language.
mm,
So I catch myself like deleting phrases in emails that sound too indecisive and things like that. And I think it's because
mm,
this project has really taught me that you're really as much of an expert as anyone can expect you to be. Like, if you're making the project, then you're qualified to do it. It's not really a matter of like, do you deserve to be here anymore? It's more of
mm-hmm.
like, you just got to complete what you started type of thing. Yeah. So I think that's definitely a net positive. I will say that I'm more stressed out. Um, and it's more of an imposter syndrome that I'm dealing with now, because until you work with a commercial thing like this or even on a group project, it's a lot of internalizing. So all my stressors before were very much like, oh, can I finish this drawing on time? Is it
Mm.
good enough? Is it as good as I want it to be? And now it's like, do I disappoint over 1,000 people that are expecting a product in the mail?
Yeah.
So it's a little overwhelming, and I mean, like, if I'm being completely honest, I don't know if I'm happier or less happy. I think I'm about the same. Um, but I definitely can feel myself expanding into what I consider like more true adulthood and entrepreneurship and like
Mm.
self-starter. I can feel myself getting more ready to be an independent artist, which is a good thing, and I'm really grateful for it. So in the long run, it's going to be a really great decision. It just feels massively overwhelming right now.
Well, and you know what? I'm loving this honesty right now because I feel like the picture that can be painted for deck creators is that it's this like amazing, like easy, like process, and you know, always positive, always great. And I think that it's important to acknowledge that, like, yes, we're feeling overwhelmed. There's stress, there's anxiety, like
Yeah,
there's difficult emotions too, and they add just as much depth than the good stuff, you know, the good
yeah.
feelings and the happiness.
Yeah, I think that's true. In terms of like spiritual enrichment and confidence with art itself, it definitely is all positive. Like it's really amazing to just see the art.
Hmm.
Like as soon as the art started rolling in, even back in like January or December, I was just overwhelmed by how beautiful it was going to be. I was like, "Oh, this is going to happen and it's going to be really good."
Yes.
So it's I mean, like, this is true of any art form ever, but the art aspect of tarot will definitely keep you afloat through all the bad times. So
Mm.
I think that's why people say that it's worth doing even when they're really stressed out, because it's so much easier to forget after the fact the sensation of being stressed because of some commercial issue,
Yep.
but to retain that feeling of being like positively
Mm.
gratified or enriched or creative when it comes to the actual product or the art that you make. So I can understand why people are like, "Oh, it's nothing but rainbows. It's amazing."
Yeah.
But it's gonna be hard going to get to that point, I think. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's
One
worth it though.
Well, and it's not only that too. I feel like, especially like if maybe the plans are to make more decks in the future, like the first one's always going to be rough, and then after
Yeah,
that, like it's going to be way smooth, you know, way more smooth and stuff. Like
yeah,
if that's the plan, right, to make more decks or whatever. And
yeah. Oh,
no, go ahead. Were you gonna say something?
I was just thinking for a moment about future plans and whether I'm crazy enough to think of them seriously yet.
It's interesting that you say that because I wanted to kind of end the conversation here with this question that I have about if, like, you know, what's next? Is there anything new? How can we support you? Like, where can we go to help you help support your project, share your stuff and all that
Sure.
stuff?
Well, the Kickstarter is over, unfortunately, but if you go to colortarotproject.com, we have all the cards that you can view there. There's a section for the actual deck. You can see everyone's art. There's also a mailing list option. I am in the middle of working with BackerKit to set up like a little pre-order store to get sort of like
Mm-hmm.
last minute orders and people that for like paycheck reasons or whatever have missed the deadline. So if you're on the mailing list, you'll be notified if we do open up a little few pre-orders for like last minute deck orders. So that's a good way to support the project. It's also a good way to be informed about any projects we do in the future because I do think there will be future decks. They'll be themed differently. I have a few plans for the future, and this is like a few years in the
Yeah,
future,
yeah,
but
yeah.
I want to do sort of like a dark themed deck. And a
Mm.
lot of it is because of my experiences during the pandemic have been so stressful and nerve wracking and frustrating that I feel like
Yeah.
sort of like a vent for people's frustrations and anger is a really big need currently in the art community. It can't all be happy. It has to have an event somewhere. So
Yes.
that might be coming down the line too, sort of like a deck themed around like the death and tower cards and stuff like that, which I think will be really
Mm.
fun and beautiful. So there will be future projects. I just don't know when.
Yeah. Don't give
um,
us a date. Don't give us any dates. Just
no,
let
yeah,
us
no,
know there's something happening.
yeah. But yeah, I think that's how to support the project best. Obviously, you can. I think I've linked I have another Instagram account. I think it's just called Color Tarot. If you follow that, any future updates will be updated on that account as well. So that's a good way to keep up if you're interested in our future projects too. And I think that's about it for now. I'm just kind of like eyeballs deep in making the current thing happen. So.
Yeah, yeah. You're still in, even though the
Yeah.
Kickstarter's over, this is not done.
Yeah, for
um,
sure.
awesome. So um I think I had another question, but I don't remember. Oh yeah, no, how to support you. Oh yeah, and the artists. You can find them all linked in the website.
Yes. The colorterrorproject.com site has a section, it's just called artists. And it has everyone's link to their portfolio page.
Mm.
It's not in alphabetical order. I organized it by color because why not?
Yeah,
But
exactly.
you can definitely scroll through. There's a bunch of gorgeous pieces that are like examples of the different artists' work, and tons of them are either working professionals or they're incredible, like personal artists that make traditional pieces and just sell them. So each artist is just honestly incredible. So it's definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, for sure. And so if you're a viewer and you're interested in getting this deck, jump on it, right? Because there's not going to be reprinting.
No, there's not. And a lot of it is because the legal issues of trying to keep track of 78 different play
Yeah,
decks is
yeah.
it's
That's
not
what
going
I
to
was.
happen.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was like, man, because if each of them put a card, that means that they would all need a cut from each
Exactly.
sale.
Yeah.
So
So it's
that's
just gonna be Kickstarter. But yeah,
awesome.
if you're interested in the Chromatic Fates deck, definitely sign up to the newsletter on the main website, and that's the best way to be informed when there are. It's only I think going to be like 100 decks or something like that, but it'll round
Mm.
out our order to the manufacturer and take care of people
Oh,
that
that
weren't
makes
able to get in.
sense. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's really awesome. And this is a really great opportunity to get this amazing deck. I got the collector's edition, so I'm just
Yeah.
like, listen, I don't even, so when I get decks and stuff, like I'll look at a couple of cards and then that's it. Like I don't look through the whole thing. I don't even know what comes in the collector's. Like I just saw that it said collectors and I was
Oh,
like, oh, this is the one I'm getting. So when I get it, it's gonna be a complete surprise. Like I'm gonna be like not knowing what anything is coming. So I'm just really excited. And it makes
nice.
it
Yeah.
even more special that it's this like limited Kickstarter, like not happening again.
Yeah. Yeah, people have asked me, even people have messaged me asking if we're doing like retail sales or wholesale. And unfortunately, it's just me doing fulfillment. So
Right.
I can't afford to do a ton of those options. Maybe in the future, we'll have more options for like little indie stores to stock our games and stuff,
Mm.
but definitely not for this particular deck. So,
So if y'all are watching, make sure to sign up for that newsletter on the Color Tarot Project. Follow Stephanie on here on her Persephone page or on her Color Tarot Project page as well. So yeah, I just wanted to end this conversation with one last piece of advice that you have, if any, for anybody interested in making a deck.
ooh, a single piece of advice. I would say because you're going to be overwhelmed really quickly, I would finish a card as soon as possible. Um, it's pretty normal. Like what I do in a lot of cases when I'm working on stuff like this, I'll thumbnail a lot of cards and I'll work on them simultaneously.
Mm,
I would polish and finish a single card so you have it like to look at and to inspire you by because it's going to very
mm,
quickly feel like the project's not going to happen and you really need to kind of manifest that in a single little example of what you're capable of as soon as you can, and I think
mm,
that'll really help. Like when I had the sample deck for our project ordered for the purposes of like product photography, just having that in hand did wonders for like my confidence level, and
mm.
it really was amazing for the Kickstarter process. So that would be my advice is like no matter what your process is or like how deeply entrenched you are, make sure that you kind of have that little totem of your future success because it'll help a lot. Like I love pairing off, especially with the project that I just wrapped up, pairing off artists where they could complement each other like on either side of their chosen cards is really important too. So I have I think Shanna Saverin is the artist that did our tower card, and it's this like really vibrant,
Mm,
kind of like purples and blues. And then I had, I think Philip Byers is the artist that did our star card. And I
mm.
knew that they go really well together because Philip does traditionally a ton of tower imagery. And I knew that like the
Oh, that's
tower and the
interesting.
star, they have to go together because the
You're right.
star is like the hope that you encounter after the destruction of the tower. So I
Hmm.
wanted to play up that the cyclical sense of like how each card leads to another type of
Yep.
imagery. So I'm all
Yes.
about that stuff.
So thank you for that advice, Stephanie, and thank you
Sure.
for joining me on this
Of course.
conversation.
Sorry about the technical difficulties in the middle there.
Hey, no worries. It all worked out, and we were able to have save both of the lives, so it's all
Yeah.
good. I had such an awesome time conversing with you, and I'm really looking forward to supporting you and what your other projects in the future.
Thank
But
you.
for right now, I'm just gonna patiently wait for the Chromatic Fates Tarot
Yes, thank
and
you.
help share your project and yeah, just send you some good healing vibes so that you can not be too stressed and over
Thank you so much. Yeah,
it.
feel free to I definitely want to hear about your deck as it progresses. So feel free to send me messages too.
Well, thank you so much, Stephanie. This
Yeah,
has
thank
been
you for
such a
having me.
lovely conversation. You're welcome. It was an honor to have you here. And if you do have decks in the future, I hope to have another conversation with you here on Deck Creator Corner.
Yeah, that would be super fun. I look forward to it.
Awesome. Well, have a great day, Stephanie. Take
Thanks, you
care.
too. Have a good one. Bye.